Welcome to
Education by
Choice, Inequality by
Chance.
So today we will be talking about how education intersects with everything in the world and everything in our daily lives based on the fundamentals we learned in philosophy and study skills this year.
We also interviewed members of NSSP, Network of Sherpa Students and Professionals, about their experience in Nepal, like their education, because two of the brothers lived in Nepal and grew up there and then came here and had education, whereas the youngest brother went to school here and was born here. So there's kind of like differences and similarities between the brothers' experiences in Nepal and New York education.
And today we'll be also taking a dive into different philosophers and their viewpoints on education. So we'll be looking at Plato, Genesis, Washington, Boys, and many more. Starting with education, Booker T. Washington believed in industrial vocational learning and education. So he basically wanted to teach black people how to do trades like construction and farming, but so they could become economically independent. His big idea was build from the bottom up, which basically means don't fight the system, prove your worth through labor and work. But the boys clap back saying we need leaders, not labor workers. The question today still stands. Are schools preparing us to survive or to lead?
I think I can actually answer that question. To keep it short, I think it depends. I think it depends on where you're looking. So for example, in my opinion, if you just look at New York City, for example, New York City has this thing called segregated schools, meaning unequal access to education, opportunities, everything. And you see it from the secondary education level to high schools. And honestly, I feel like in terms of survival, low-income schools that have less opportunity, less accessibility to diversity, extracurriculars, whatever, the things that make New York City accessible to all, makes New York City public schools a tool for survival. Survival if a student takes the opportunity that if they do well on their tests, if they do well in their report cards, that maybe they will escape their neighborhood and go to a university that can give them access to doors that are usually closed for them. And if they don't do that, it just means they have to go out into the labor force and work those 9 to 5. They don't view school as access to something else. They view it as just being in a room for 8 hours a day and learning from a teacher that doesn't care about their education. And so they're often, after school, they either go to work or they just don't care about their education. But if you look at New York City specialized high schools or top schools that are not accessible to all because they either require a test or a application, those students often, regardless of their background, usually are taught to lead because they have more access to a quality of education and more resources with their school community, whether that's their teachers or their peers, and they honestly have access to like everything that the city has to offer. I was telling you guys how my counselor, for example, emails every student about opportunities, extracurriculars, clubs, research projects that a student can take after school. And yet in Brandon's school, they don't do that, which I think is a reflection of how our schools differ, because I was fortunate enough to get into one of those top schools, and through that I have access to a better education than I did going to school in the Bronx. And I have more access to extracurriculars that make me as an applicant more competitive than others when I'm applying to university.
Yeah, going back to what Hermione was saying about like labor, like low-income students, it's not only happening in the U.S. or like New York, it's also happening in like third world countries such as Nepal. As I mentioned before in the introduction, we did interview people from like who went to school in Nepal and their experiences there, and they said how students there usually or like typically work at home as well, like for their family to provide, and then they also have jobs after school that they would go straight to like for money and like just to provide for their families.
Children's living in village, they have to like raise the cattle, do all the household chores, and then only they go to school. And most of the time they don't even go to school, like because they have to help, or like someone's sick in the family and they cannot go, they have to take care of elders. So the real obstacles is like the poverty that restricts them from getting access to education.
And like Hermione was talking about the SHSAT, like my school, for example, like my middle school never provided like tutoring for students to apply. And like my school is like a K through 12, so I guess they wanted students to stay, but those who actually wanted to leave, like they didn't really like give us any like tutoring to help us leave. Like you have to do it on your own kind of, and we are from low income families, so like how are we gonna pay for tutoring? We didn't really have access to education, like good education.
I know in Jamaica, you have to meet specific requirements to continue schooling. So if you're in middle school and you didn't have a high education in middle school, and you wouldn't be able to continue on to high school because you're not valued as being smart. You're not valued because you're not worth the government's money. So you wouldn't go through. They would put you behind and they would just force you to work a 9 to 5 because it's not fair for the people that are actually smart and willing to put in the work in school. So they'll just hold you back.
I think everybody here had great perspectives and great opinions on how education was like for them growing up. But what about technology? I know in Genesis, technology was seen as a bad thing because it gave them wisdom and like it gave them that sense of education about like their whereabouts. So do you guys think like technology is all that bad?
I think technology is bad and good. I think in Genesis, like the bad aspect to Adam and Eve eating the apple was that they gained consciousness and they were able to realize that being nude was a shameful thing, which allowed them to innovate clothes, even if it was just the leaves. And I think today, in my personal experience, I think technology for me is just like access to a quality of education and like the MTA, for example. I think if New York City wasn't so diverse and if it wasn't like a city, I don't think I would have had access to getting a quality of education if I didn't have access to an Omni card, if I couldn't take the train 40 minutes from the Bronx to get to Manhattan. The bad part of it is that I have to travel out of my community to get education rather than staying at home because these resources just aren't provided at home. But the good thing is that I get quality of education even if that makes me realize that inequalities do exist, which I think if we think about Plato and the allegory of the cave, ignorance is bliss, and sometimes I do wish I was ignorant to inequalities, but I think because I was given the opportunity to venture out into the world and see all of these inequalities, I think it is allowing me to view the world in another perspective and what I can do to combat these things.
Yeah, and I also think that like what's like really good, but also like the scary part of technology is that it's always evolving, like it's always changing, like throughout time. Like 100 years ago, a fridge was like a crazy invention, but now today, like we have AI, and now we're scared that it's gonna take our jobs and like take over like our brains and like all this scary part. And it's just like, how do we combat like how technology is gonna like take over?
The problem with technology is that with each new innovation becomes a new problem. So for example, like transportation, going through your own borough to go to another one, that causes problems because you don't know what's on those stations. For example, like crime levels are high right now, going on the train is dangerous, but you have to leave your home because there's no access to the things that there is in other boroughs like Manhattan and the Bronx. There's more accessibility for people in Manhattan because those are not predominantly people of color in those communities.
So connecting this back to our reading, Phaedrus, Socrates mentions how verbal communication is much better than writing, and connecting this back to the interview we did with the three brothers in Nepal, one of them mentioned how in Nepal they mostly do writing and they don't really have any communication with their teachers. They don't talk back to their teachers like how we do in the US.
Was there a difference in your education to when you were in the US to Nepal?
Paul, the education system is very structured and discipline oriented. So students are expected to follow instructions. It's more focused heavily on like memorization, roadstering. It didn't necessarily encourage like open discussion and challenging ideas. So when I first came to the US, I was surprised to see how like students openly expressed their opinions and even like questioned their professors when they said something, like disagreeing with their teachers or classmates. Here in the US, we do a good job of helping kids do critical thinking, class discussion, and like participation. So I think that shift really changed how I viewed learning, and it helped me become more confident in expressing myself.
He saw that the students were having these conversations with their teachers, they were engaging, they were doing debates, but in Nepal they never had that type of education.
It's so crazy how Phaedrus has this like assertion that like verbal communication is better than writing, but in Nepal, writing is all they have. Like there is no verbal communication when it comes to education, and how like that is like the big difference that these brothers were talking about when how from the transition from Nepali education to American education.
No, yeah, I think if we were to ask them today, like, do you think verbal communication allows you to grow your critical thinking skills, they would agree, which is just what Socrates was arguing in Phaedrus. I will say that I personally I feel mixed way. I think that verbal communication can be better than writing, but I feel like some people are better writers than they are talkers, and some people can articulate themselves better than they can write. So I think it honestly depends. I don't think one is better than the other.
Yeah. So this is the end of the podcast, and we want all viewers in our intended audience to take away.
We hope that today's podcast
leaves you all with the understanding
That inequality restricts the ability
to choose education.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome to Education by
Choice.
Inequalities by
Chance.
Go.
Welcome to Education by
Choice.
Stop laughing.
3, 2, 1.
Welcome
This is never getting recorded.
3, 2, 1, go.
Welcome to Education by
Stop laughing. Okay, back up.
Welcome to Education by
Choice. Inequality.
Germayoni, you actually have a mental problem.
It's so funny. 3, 2, 1, go.
Welcome to oh dang.
Chris is just
Talking to the brothers in Nepal, one of them stopped. That was so good.
It makes it harder to talk, dude.
That was good.
philosophers like Booker T. Washington, Du Bois, Plato, the economic origins of mass incarceration. And today we'll also be taking a dive into different philosophers.